Hi, welcome. I'm Eleanor, and today I thought I would talk about something that I've looked into a little bit about the first person singular, the I, within the poem. And I'm doing that because I have a new poetry friend who sent me a message saying that sometimes when he reads poems with the I in them, first person singular, he feels like it's a bit cringy, like it's too earnest. And I thought to myself, God, that's that's so true. And I was so thankful that he brought that to my attention, because I certainly feel that sometimes, and I will just sort of dispose of the books that have that earnest quality about them. And although a lot of people like those sorts of poems with the very earnest, cringy I, there's something artistically missing from them a lot of the time, but you can't put your finger on it, and I certainly couldn't. So then I remember that Dorothea Lasky writes about the metaphysical I, and she is a great source. So I have this book of hers, Animal, which is a collection of lectures she gave. I think they're called the Bagley Wright lecture series. And in her introduction, she talks about the metaphysical I being the crux of her poetics. She says it functions as a ghost haunting even this book. And it's beyond the idea of the singular self. So if you watch my Sealy Challenge videos, you probably noticed what I have noticed when I've been going back through them, is that I almost always talk about the I of the poem as being the same as the poet. And I'll often give lip service to the fact that they're not, but eventually I always go back to that by default. And I think that's a sign of immaturity in myself as a reader, that I have to continue learning that to look beyond the biography of the poet. But it's also a signal that I was probably receiving in some way from certain poets, maybe some poets more than others. Now, yes, every book of poetry is going to be unique to that particular poet, and that poet has their own life and their own biography. But within each poem, if it's a good poem, there should be something else happening with that I. And if that is happening, then the I is not too earnest and is not cringy. And Dorothea Lasky has a way of discussing that through a discussion of Lorca and his writing on the aesthetic of duende. Now, if you look up duende, now I actually, before I go on, this is my absolute Bible. I mean, it's a big book, but if you're really interested in poetry, this will last a lifetime. I leave a link down below. So many times I've gone to it. So what Edward Hirsch says on the subject of duende is that in Spanish folklore, it's an imp, a hobgoblin, it's a trickster who meddles and stirs up trouble. But then when it's brought into the idea of the arts, the word duende is also applied to the ineffable, mysterious charm of certain gifted people, especially flamenco singers. See? Okay, so now we're going to the singing. And then I am also thinking about dancing, of course, which is very exciting for me. And I'll explain later how I'm bringing in dancing as well. But before I do that, the Lorca, who is a famous poet now, a famous poet who I have not read, I should say, so I'll leave a link for you and me down below. He uses it the word duende in a special form in connection to poetry, and he says it's an erotic form of dark inspiration. And it has to do with seeing death and the struggle with that. And Dorothea Lasky then says in this book that duende is a little demon. It's a demon that is needed for a poem to work. Otherwise, it's not actually a poem. So you have the duende, that little demon, and then you have the eye of the poem. Now, Lasky's view is that the eye of the poem has to have the power to control the duende. So as the poet, let's say you're the poet and you're writing, what you're really doing is not a thought process here, but it's about the eye of the poem and the duende working. I think it's something that's almost impossible to understand until you've witnessed it. So, as my friend says, he's witnessed the lack of duende. There is the eye, but the duende has not come into the picture. And it's just like, so earnest. And it's, I mean, it has a purpose, but it's not, it's not a poem. And I tend to agree with that. So that all came about while I was reading this book. So the minute I finished the Seeley Challenge, this book arrived in the mail, like a day or two later, I guess. And I had read one of Lucy Brock-Broido's books, and I loved it so much, albeit didn't understand it fully, but I was very, very impatient to read another one of her books. And this has not disappointed. This is good. This is very good. But it is, look, it's not easy. It's not a book that I can, read easily. Why do I say it's good if, it's not easy and I'll need to read it, for years to come, and I had to, look quite a few things up. Why do I say it's really good? Because it's got the duende in it. It's got the duende. It's got that little imp. It's got it in spades. It's got so much of it, and the eye changes from poem to poem and still remains in control of the duende. How she does that, I don't know. So this is a book of letters that is based on Emily Dickinson's letters. I think they found 3 letters in a small chest after her death. And they were letters written to dear master. And till today, we're not sure, is she writing to a lover? Is she writing to an editor? Is she writing to God? Is she writing to a muse of poetry? It's very open. So Lucy Brock-Broido took that kind of template and then took much of the otherworldly language, and Dickinson's language often feels otherworldly. And she also took the strange capitalization that Dickinson has, and she uses it here. And then she just made it her own. As much as she took the duende, that's how she took Emily Dickinson's duende as well. I mean, yeah, she's got 2 duendes here, actually, working together. Her own and and the one that Dickinson tamed. And the word tamed now brings me to something else. The idea of the wild, of the animal, of the distinction between a human and an animal, and what that means in art. So I was thinking about that idea of the animal and went back to Dorothea Lasky because she has another chapter that is all about the animal. The beast, how poetry makes us human. And she has she's so fabulous. She has a quote at the beginning of this section from Fleetwood Mac, Tusk. Don't say that you love me, just tell me that you want me. Tusk, 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 tusk. So in the second paragraph, she writes this: I've been invested in the notion of a poem being feral, as Lucy Brock-Broido described this term to her students. So you see, sometimes things just come together. And how this ferality could make a being partly not part of itself and partly wholly of the self. So this just blows my mind. And then I think of Shane McCrae. Because in the book that I read, which I only have on my Kobo, the book Cain Named the Animal, which I read, and I'll have a link to that as well, he has a couple of poems. He talks about dogs a couple of times in a very odd way. And it's been intriguing me ever since. And of course, the title of the book is Cain Named the Animal. And so now I, can't stop thinking about it. And I go back to his poems. So he has a couple of poems that I was specifically interested in, and they happen to be about the animal. So there's a poem called Husbands, and it's hang on, I'll bring it up because it's really good to read together with Lucy Brock-Broido, interestingly enough. So this is Husbands. Oh, dream I live in which I dream, whose dreams I have, and failing tried, not harming them to live inside, too often making like a pet dog, suddenly unfamiliar, killing a wild rabbit, enraged for no reason, he even with the body between his red teeth knows subsuming the wild blood and body, too often making your dreams mine, and leaves his wildness after and returns to his old self. But now for anyone who saw him wild, the blood now stains his mouth forever. For anyone who saw the rabbit move, still like it was alive, still moving with the motion of the jaws consuming it. So there's that play between the animal domesticated, the animal wild. And there's an eye in here, but that eye has captured the duende. You will not cringe. You will not feel this is earnest. This is poetry. So then I'm oscillating now between Brock-Broido, Shane McCrae, Dorothea Lasky. I'm like, they're my triangle. It's unbelievable. So now I'm like, wait. Brock-Broido had something in this very similar. So I go to her poem, page 26, Her Habit, February. Master, because I was in the habit of you, and because I have an ardor for the lie, I cannot speak until I know. No cringing, right? No cringing. I'll continue though. I have watched for you up and down the long clay path demi-daily. Sometimes I think I hear you in the solemn bark of birds or the cantering of dogs as they bring home their quarry gently in their mouths. No pierced skin, no feathers askew, only the unbruised slant of a neck broken by fear. Limp now and perfect in the fluidity of damaged form. mean, that's just the first half of the poem. I feel the duende. I know what to call that feeling now. It's a poem like this. It looks like a letter. I just got chills down my spine. But wait for the endings. I'll skip the second half because there's no time. It'll be, an hour-long video. The last two lines go like this. I do not let go it because it is mine. I mean, chills down my spine. It's so good. No cringe. No cringe. No earnestness. Woo! It's so good. So, God, love it. So where was I? Oh yeah. So I'm thinking, you know what, I can't wait to talk about this on YouTube because this is the way I get my thoughts together. It's much more fun than sitting and writing an essay or something. And I'm really enjoying this interaction, with whoever's out there. So then I was thinking of dance, and I was thinking of the Batsheva dance group and how they follow Gaga, which is the name of this choreography by Ohad Naharin. And I remembered that there was a dance documentary, on Netflix. So last night I watched just the one episode. I want to watch the rest later, about this dance idea, movement, choreography called Gaga. And one of the first things that Ohad Naharin says is, it brings out the animal in me. And I've been spending the whole day reading this. And with McCrae's book, Cain Named the Animal. And the master letters that's filled with duende. And I just felt like it was a really marvelous way of teaching myself how to mature in my poetry reading. One of my aims as I'm reading more and more is to be able to understand better why certain poems work for me and some not. And it is for me. I am talking about myself. I can't speak for anybody else. Poetry can be many things to many different people. But what is it for me? And I think this idea of the animal, this idea of something in the human that stops looking at itself and instead just gets in touch with itself, is very powerful. It's like within Gaga, they don't have mirrors. Mirrors are forbidden. And I thought to myself, actually, the best poems do not have mirrors either, because a poem really is a kind of enclosure. And even I think the word stanza originally meant room. You go into a room, which is a poem, and you don't necessarily want to see yourself in the mirror. And also as a poet, you're not looking at yourself in the mirror. You're doing something else. You're using your language like a dancer uses their body. So when Ohad Naharin says, we are not our thoughts, we are much more our body, I was thinking, from the poetry angle, we are not our thoughts, we are much more our language. And I think that's why I am so attracted to poems that are more language and less thought. And I think I'm attracted also to other art forms that are like that. I think once you embrace that, and you have to embrace that through practice, as a reader, as a writer, as a dancer, as an audience member, then you get more familiar with it. It doesn't seem as odd. But it has to feel odd because it's not the usual way we manage in society on a daily basis. It's art. It's art. So I think, oh no, that is not everything I wanted to say. I wanted to say one more thing. So we've got Shane McCrae. So we've got Lucy Brock-Broido. So we've got Dorothea Lasky. Now, they all happened to be at my desk through serendipity. However, it is very important for me to point out that they were all at one time working both as teachers and writers at Columbia University in New York. And it is fascinating to me because, as you know, I love to think of poets as celebrities. They are my celebrities. And sometimes I do take it too far. I love a little bit of poet gossip. But that being said, I think there's something so powerful about a group of artists who work not even in collaboration. Obviously, it's not an obvious collaboration, but if you're always, if you're walking down a corridor and seeing each other, if you're talking together, on a daily basis about anything, if you live in the same vicinity as each other, you're going to find a lot of exciting artistic stuff happening. And I think that is what I'm picking up on with these three posts. Now, of course, the only reason I came to Lucy Brock-Broido was because in Cain Named the Animal by McCrae, he has two poems in her memory. He misses her. She was obviously a very, very precious person to him. I spoke about this in that video. So, it is quite obvious sometimes. And that made me think of how it's usually when we look back that we see groups of poets. I was thinking about the New York School of Poets. Well, it's really the New York School, which is the artists, and then the poets kind of gathered together around them. And of course, I think the four main New York poets, they didn't start off. It wasn't like they started off in New York. I think three of them started off in Harvard University and then moved to New York. So again, there's that idea of universities that do have the power to put like-minded artists together. And I just love that. And I love that I'm thinking perhaps for a short period of time before, sadly, Lucy Brock-Broido left this world, that there was this Columbia School circle, I guess, of these three poets who connected somehow, and that makes me feel really happy. It gives me great joy. Okay, so I'll leave as many links as I can down below. I wish you all the very best, and I'll see you in the next video. And don't forget that the only real property is the property of the mind. Bye.